The Broken Tusk Cantina sat on the edge of known space, a place where laws meant nothing and credits meant everything. And tonight it was packed with the most dangerous creatures in 3-star system. Smoke from a dozen different burning substances filled the air, and the smell of alien alcohol mixed with the sweat of mercenaries who had not bathed in weeks. And somewhere in the back, a card game had turned violent. But nobody seemed to care. A Vorak Malthresh sat in his usual corner, his massive frame taking up enough space for 3 normal beings, and his 4 eyes scanned the room with the patience of someone who had survived more battles than most species had recorded history. He was Kelani, one of the oldest warrior races in the galaxy, and his gray-green skin was covered with bioluminescent scars that glowed faintly blue in the dim light, each one representing a kill, each one a story of blood and victory. The young mercenaries had gathered around his table like children around a campfire, drawn by his reputation, hungry for his wisdom, desperate to learn the secrets that had kept him alive for 300 years. A Thixian bounty hunter named Kreth was the loudest among them, his insect-like mandibles clicking with excitement as he waved a data tablet in the air, and his compound eyes reflected the glow of the screen as he boasted about his latest contract, 5,000 credits per head. Kreth announced to anyone who would listen, and there are at least 200 of them in that colony, so do the math, my friends, because I am about to become very wealthy. The other young hunters made sounds of approval, their various vocal organs producing clicks and growls and whistles of encouragement, and they slapped Kreth on his chitinous back with congratulations. Vark said nothing, but his upper left eye twitched slightly, and his hand tightened around his drinking vessel. The hegemony wants them for the labor camps, Kreth continued, his voice growing louder with each word, and they say humans are weak and soft and easy to capture. So this will be the simplest job I have ever taken. The cantina grew quieter, and several of the older mercenaries at nearby tables exchanged glances, and a few of them quietly gathered their things and moved to seats farther away from Vorak's corner. The young hunters did not notice, too caught up in their dreams of easy credits and simple victories. I have heard humans cannot even see in the dark, one of them said, a reptilian creature with scales the color of rust, and they have no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons of any kind. They are basically walking meat, another added, a 4-armed being whose species Vorak did not recognize. And the galaxy will not miss a few hundred of them. Kreth's mandibles spread wide in what passed for a smile among his kind, and he raised his drink in a toast to his own future success, too. Easy prey and fat profits, he declared. The sound of Vorak's drinking vessel hitting the table silenced everyone within 20 meters. Old Kelani warrior rose slowly from his seat, and the bioluminescent scars across his body pulsed brighter, casting strange shadows on the walls, and his 4 eyes fixed on Kreth with an intensity that made the young Thixian take an involuntary step backward. "Return the contract," Vorak said, and his voice was low and calm, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he had shouted. Kreth tried to laugh, but the sound came out thin and weak, and his mandibles clicked nervously as he looked to his companions for support. With respect, "Elder, I think you may have had too much to drink tonight, because this is a standard capture contract and nothing more." Vorak moved closer, and despite his age and size, he moved with the fluid grace of a predator, and the young hunters parted before him like water before a ship. "I have killed more beings than you have met in your short life," Vorak said, stopping directly in front of Kreth, "and I have fought creatures that would make your nightmares seem pleasant, and I have walked away from battles that left entire armies dead." He reached up and began to roll back the sleeve of his worn leather coat, revealing the skin of his forearm, and what the young hunter saw there made several of them gasp. A massive burn scar covered the entire limb. The tissue twisted and melted, and unlike the glowing marks that decorated the rest of his body, this wound had never properly healed. And it did not glow at all. Kelani heal from everything, Creth whispered, because everyone knew this was true. Because the regenerative abilities of the Kelani were legendary throughout the galaxy. Almost everything. Vorak corrected him, and this scar is 40 years old. And it still hurts when the temperature drops, and it will never heal. And it will stay with me until I die. He lowered his sleeve and looked around at the gathered hunters. And his eyes held something that none of them had ever expected to see in the face of the galaxy's most feared. Mercenary fear. 40 years ago. I was young and stupid and arrogant, just like all of you, Vorak said. And I took a contract very similar to the one you are holding now. And I led 12 of the best warriors I had ever known to a small human colony on a frontier world. He walked back to his table and sat down heavily. And suddenly, he looked every one of his 300 years. 12 went in, he said quietly, and I alone walked out. And I have never forgotten what those humans taught me. Creth's mandibles had stopped clicking, and his compound eyes were wide, and the data tablet hung forgotten in his grip. Sit down, Vorak commanded, gesturing to the empty seats around his table, and listen carefully, because I am about to tell you a story that will either save your life or end your career. The young hunter sat, crowding around the table, pushing and shoving for the best positions. And even some of the older mercenaries drifted closer to Vorak, took a long drink from his vessel, and set it down carefully. And his scars pulsed slowly as he gathered his thoughts. The world was called New Meridian, he began. And it was a small colony on the edge of human-controlled space. And the corporation that hired us said it would be simple work for good pay. He laughed. But there was no humor in it. They said humans were weak, primitive newcomers to the galaxy, that they had no experience with real warfare, that they would scatter like frightened prey animals at the first sign of professional soldiers. His 4 eyes grew distant, looking at something none of them could see, memories playing behind them like old footage. They were wrong about everything, he said. And by the time I understood that, it was far too late. The cantina had grown completely silent now, and even the bartender had stopped polishing glasses to listen. I warn you now, as I have warned many others over these 40 years, Vorak said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Never hunt humans, never underestimate them. Never assume you understand what they are capable of. He leaned forward, and his scars flared bright enough to cast shadows. Or you will suffer consequences you cannot imagine. Creth swallowed hard, his throat producing an audible click. Tell us what happened, he said, and Vorak began to speak. 40 years earlier, the mercenary ship Crimson Fang dropped out of hyperspace above a small blue and green world that the humans called New Meridian. Vorak stood at the observation window of the bridge, and he was young then, barely a century old, and his scars were fewer, and his confidence was absolute. And he watched the planet rotate slowly beneath them with the satisfaction of a hunter who has cornered easy prey. Initial scans complete. His second-in-command reported, a scarred Kelani female named Thessa, whose reputation for violence was nearly as impressive as his own. And we are reading approximately 200 human life signs, clustered in a single settlement near the northern continent. Vorak nodded, his 4 eyes studying the tactical display that showed the colony as a small cluster of buildings surrounded by dense forest. Defensive capabilities, he asked. Minimal? Thessa replied with a sound that might have been a laugh. And they appear to have basic projectile weapons, probably chemical propellant firearms, along with some agricultural equipment that could theoretically be used as weapons. The other members of the crew gathered on the bridge made sounds of amusement, and Vorak allowed himself a thin smile. 12 warriors comprised his team, each one hand-selected over years of working together, each one a specialist in their field. each one worth 10 ordinary soldiers in a fight. There was Grex, the demolitions expert, whose species could see heat signatures through solid walls, and Mora, the sniper, whose 3 arms allowed her to steady her rifle with inhuman precision, and Keth, the tracker, whose sense of smell could follow a target across an entire continent. The others were equally impressive. Veterans of dozens of campaigns, survivors of wars that had killed millions. And together, they had never failed a contract. The corporation wants the land cleared, Vorak reminded them, pulling up the mission briefing on the main screen. And they are not particular about methods. So this can be as clean or as messy as we choose to make it. He turned to face his crew, and his scars glowed with anticipation. The humans have been offered fair compensation to relocate, and they have refused. So now they face the consequences of that decision. How much resistance should we expect? Grex asked, his thermal vision already scanning the colony below for heat sources. These are farmers and families, Vorak replied dismissively. And humans are known throughout the galaxy as a soft species, emotional and easily frightened. So I expect they will run at the first sign of real warriors. Thesia pulled up a file on the main screen, showing images of humans alongside various other species for scale comparison. No natural armor, she noted, and no claws or fangs, and their bodies are fragile compared to most sentient species. And their reaction time is slower than average. And they require regular sleep cycles that last for hours. So we attack at night, Vorak decided, because their eyes are poorly adapted to darkness, and we move in fast. And we give them no time to organize or escape. The plan was simple because the mission was simple. And they spent the rest of the day preparing their equipment and running final checks on their weapons. And when the sun set on the colony below, the Crimson Fang descended through the atmosphere like a blade falling toward flesh. They landed 3 kilometers from the settlement, far enough to avoid detection, but close enough for a quick approach. And Vorak led his team through the alien forest with the confidence of absolute superiority. The trees were strange, with leaves that rustled in unfamiliar patterns, and the sounds of local wildlife surrounded them. Small creatures fleeing from the approach of predators. I smell them, Keth reported, his long snout twitching. And there are many scent trails, but they are confused, going in multiple directions. Probably panicked when they saw our ship, Mora suggested, her 3 arms already assembling her sniper rifle. And they are likely running for their lives as we speak. Vorak signaled for silence as they approached the edge of the settlement. And what they found there made him pause for the first time since the mission began. The buildings were empty, not abandoned, not hastily evacuated, but systematically emptied, with doors left open and lights still burning, as if the inhabitants had simply walked away in an organized fashion. Spread out, Vorak ordered, and search every structure. His team moved through the colony like ghosts, checking buildings and calling out findings over their communication devices. And the reports that came back were all the same: empty homes with food still on tables, empty workshops with projects half completed, empty schools with lessons still written on display boards. Where did they go? Thesa asked, standing beside Vorak in what appeared to be the colony's central square. Keth was sniffing the air, his expression growing more confused with each breath. The trails lead everywhere, he reported, into the forest in 100 different directions. And some of them are hours old, while others are fresh. And I cannot tell which way the main group went. Vorak's confidence wavered for just a moment. A small crack in his certainty, and then he pushed the feeling aside. They knew we were coming, he reasoned. And they fled into the wilderness like the prey animals they are. And now we simply have to hunt them down. A hunt then, Grex said, and there was eagerness in his voice. Because I was worried this would be too easy. The others laughed, and Vorak joined them. and they fanned out into the forest to track down their quarry. The first body was discovered at dawn. It was Keth, the tracker, found at the bottom of a concealed pit that had been dug into the forest floor and covered with branches and leaves. And there were sharpened wooden stakes at the bottom, primitive but effective. And they had pierced his body in a dozen places. He had died alone in the darkness, probably calling for help on a communication device that had somehow been disabled. And none of them had heard a thing. Vorak stood at the edge of the pit, looking down at his fallen comrade, and for the first time in many years, he felt something cold settle into his stomach. This was not panic, Thesa said quietly, standing beside him, and this trap was prepared in advance, dug carefully and hidden perfectly. Before Vorak could respond, another call came over the communication system. This one from Mora, who had found a second body. It was Grex, the demolitions expert, and he had been killed by a sharpened stake driven through his throat while he slept. And whoever had done it had moved so quietly that the warrior in the next sleeping position had not even stirred. 3 of his 12 were dead before the sun had fully risen, and they had not seen a single human. Vorak gathered his remaining team in a defensive formation, weapons ready, senses alert, and he looked out at the forest that surrounded them with new eyes. This was not a hunt anymore. This was a war, and somewhere in those dark trees, the humans were watching, waiting. He just did not know yet what they were waiting for. 3 days into the mission, and Vorak had lost 5 of his warriors without ever seeing the enemy face to face. The deaths came in ways that made no sense to him. Primitive methods that should not have worked against trained mercenaries with advanced technology. And yet each morning brought new bodies and new horror. Shenna, the infiltration specialist, had drunk from a stream that had been poisoned with something the humans had extracted from local plants. And she had died screaming as her organs failed one by one. Rix and Torma had been killed by a massive log that swung down from the trees on a rope, crushing them against a boulder before either could react. A trap so simple that it felt like an insult. The remaining 7 mercenaries had stopped laughing about easy prey. They moved in tight formation now, weapons constantly ready, sleeping in shifts with multiple guards. And still the humans found ways through their defenses. Vorak had ordered a full sensor sweep of the surrounding forest, and the results had shown nothing. No heat signatures, no movement, no signs of the 200 humans who were supposedly hiding somewhere in this wilderness. They're not using technology, Thesa realized one evening, her voice heavy with grudging respect. And everything they are doing is natural, organic, invisible to our scanners. That is impossible, one of the younger warriors protested. A Kelani named Vior, whose confidence had been shattered by the deaths of his companions. Because no species can hide from full-spectrum sensors. They are not hiding from the sensors, Vorak said quietly, understanding beginning to dawn in his mind. They are simply not using anything that the sensors would detect. No electronic communication devices, no powered weapons, no artificial heat sources. Just human bodies and human minds and the natural resources of the forest. And somehow, that was enough. On the 4th day, Vorak finally caught one of them. It happened by accident. A human who had stayed too long at an observation point, who had been caught in the open when Vorak happened to glance in the right direction at the right moment. She was young by human standards, perhaps 20 years old, with dark hair and fierce eyes. And she fought like a wild animal when he grabbed her, kicking and biting and scratching until he managed to restrain her. The other mercenaries wanted to kill her immediately, to send a message, but Vorak had other ideas. She has information, he said, dragging her to their camp, and we need to understand what we are fighting. They tied her to a tree, and Vorak stood before her, using his full height to intimidate, letting his scars glow bright in the darkness. Tell me how many you are, he demanded, and tell me where your people are hiding. The human looked up at him and did something he did not expect. She laughed it. was not the nervous laughter of prey caught by a predator, but the genuine amusement of someone who knew something he did not. And it made Vorak's skin crawl. "You do not understand what you are dealing with," she said. And her voice was steady and calm despite her situation. Vorak leaned closer, letting her see the sharpness of his teeth. "I have conquered worlds," he growled. "And I have killed thousands, and I understand exactly what humans are." "No," she replied, shaking her head. "You really do not." She began to talk, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted him to understand. And what she told him changed everything. "Every species in the galaxy runs from predators," she explained. "Because that is the sensible thing to do. Because evolution teaches you to flee from things that want to eat you." She smiled, and there was something terrible in that smile. "Humans are the species that looked at predators and said, 'I can't take that.'" She told him about something called persistence hunting, how ancient humans would chase prey animals for days without stopping, following them relentlessly until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. "Most species are faster than us," she admitted. "But nothing can run forever, and we just keep coming, hour after hour, day after day, until our prey simply gives up." Vorak felt the cold in his stomach grow worse. She told him about wolves, creatures from the human homeworld that were essentially the same as Kalani war beasts, vicious predators that humans had not conquered through dominance or violence. "We made them our friends," she said, and there was pride in her voice. "We looked at the most dangerous hunters on our planet, and we decided to turn them into family." The other mercenaries had gathered to listen, their weapons forgotten in their hands, their eyes fixed on this small human who spoke of her species like she was describing gods. She told them about oceans crossed in wooden boats, about mountains climbed because they were there, about diseases that killed millions being defeated by sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. "We split the atom," she said, "and we walked on our own moon using nothing but mathematics and controlled explosions. And we did these things not because we are strong or fast or tough, but because we do not know how to quit." Vorak's voice came out rougher than he intended. "You are prisoners on this world, hiding in a forest from superior enemies, and you speak as if you have already won." The human woman met his 4 eyes with her too, and there was no fear in her gaze at all. "We have been in worse situations," she replied, "and we are still here. And where are the dinosaurs? Where are the saber-toothed cats? Where are all the things that were bigger and stronger and faster than us?" She leaned forward against her restraints. "Extinct," she whispered. "Every single one of them, and we are still here." That night, Vorak doubled the guards and had his team sleep in rotating shifts. But somehow it was not enough. He woke to screaming and the smell of smoke. And by the time he had grabbed his weapon and emerged from his shelter, half the camp was burning. The human woman was gone, her restraints cut by hands that had moved through a guarded camp without making a sound, and 2 more of his warriors were dead. Vorak stood in the burning ruins of his camp as the sun rose. 6 dead and only 5 remaining, and he finally understood what the human woman had been trying to tell him. They were not trapped on this planet with him. He was trapped here with them. Day 7 brought rain and despair. Vorak had led what remained of his team back toward their ship, abandoning the mission, abandoning the contract, thinking only of survival now. But when they reached the landing site, they found the Crimson Fang sitting dark and dead on the scorched earth, every system disabled, every circuit fried by something the humans had done during the night. "They got past our security," Thesis said, her voice hollow, "and they sabotaged the ship without triggering a single alarm." Vorak walked up the boarding ramp and into the vessel that had been his home for decades. And what he found inside made him want to scream. Everything valuable had been left untouched. All the weapons and supplies and credits still in their places. But the navigation systems and engines and Communication arrays had been systematically destroyed with a precision that spoke of deep technical knowledge. They had not done this in rage or desperation. They had done it with calculation, with planning, with the cold efficiency of predators who knew exactly what they were doing. The message was clear: you are not leaving Day 8. They lost Var, the youngest of the remaining warriors, killed by a wire strung across a game trail at exactly the height of his throat. Day 9. Thesa disappeared while scouting ahead, and they found her body the next morning, laid out carefully with her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes closed, arranged with something that almost looked like respect. Day 10. They were 4. Day 11. They were 3. Vorak had stopped sleeping, his 4 eyes constantly scanning the forest around them, his weapon never leaving his hands, and he had begun to see humans in every shadow, to hear footsteps in every rustle of leaves. On Day 12, the humans finally showed themselves. It happened at midday, when the sun was highest and the visibility was best. When Vorak and his 2 remaining warriors had stopped to rest in a small clearing, a man walked out of the forest. He was old by human standards, perhaps 60 years, with gray hair and weathered skin and the kind of calm that comes from absolute certainty. And he carried no weapons that Vorak could see. "My name is Samuel Chun," the man said, stopping a few meters away, "and I am the leader of this colony." Vorak's remaining warriors raised their weapons, but Vorak held up a hand to stop them. "You are here to surrender?" he asked. Though even as he said it, he knew how foolish the words sounded. Samuel Chun smiled, and it was the same smile the young woman had worn, the smile of someone who knew something others did not. "I am here to offer you a choice," he said. He sat down on a fallen log, moving slowly and deliberately, making no threatening gestures, and he looked up at the 3 mercenaries with eyes that had seen more than his years should allow. "You came here to take our home," he said, "and the corporation that hired you told you we were soft and weak and primitive." His smile faded. They were wrong. He told Vorak that the colonists had prepared for this possibility from the day they landed, that they had studied the tactics of every species in the galaxy, that they had trained in the old ways of human warfare that did not rely on technology. "We call it guerrilla warfare," Samuel explained. "And it is how our ancestors defeated empires with nothing but sticks and determination." His voice grew harder. "We would have negotiated, and we would have shared the mining rights, and we would have found a solution that worked for everyone." He shook his head. But the corporation did not want a solution, and they did not want partners, and they wanted us gone. He stood up slowly. "So here we are, one of Vorak's warriors, a young Kalani named Threk, whose nerves had shattered under the pressure of the past days, suddenly raised his weapon and charged at Samuel with a wordless scream. The shot came from somewhere in the forest, a single crack that echoed through the trees, and Threk was dead before he hit the ground. A hole through his skull from a rifle that Vorak never saw. Samuel had not moved, had not flinched, had not even blinked. "That was Tomas," he said calmly. "And he was a farmer before all this started. And he has not missed a shot in 30 years. He turned his attention back to Vorak. "You have a choice to make." His eyes were old and tired and filled with something that might have been sadness. "We did not start this," Samuel said, "but we will finish it, and that is what humans do. And we adapt and we endure, and we never ever stop." He gestured toward the forest behind Vorak. "Leave now. Walk back to your ship. Use the emergency beacon that I know you have hidden in your armor, and call for extraction." He paused. "Or stay and fight, and join your crew in the soil of New Meridian." Vorak's last remaining warrior was looking at him with desperate eyes, begging without words for permission to run. "Why?" Vorak asked, his voice rough with exhaustion and something that felt uncomfortably like defeat. "Why would you let us go after everything we have done?" Samuel Chun was quiet for a long moment. "Because killing you serves no purpose," he finally said. "And we are not monsters, and we do not take joy in death. And we only wanted to protect our home." He looked at Varrock with something like pity. "And because you are more useful to us alive, carrying this story back to whoever sent you, warning others what happens when they underestimate humanity." Varrock understood then what the humans had done. They had not just beaten him. They had turned him into a weapon against his own people. A living message that would spread fear wherever he went. He should have felt angry, should have felt humiliated, should have wanted to fight to the death rather than accept such a defeat instead. He felt only exhaustion and a deep respect for the creatures who had so thoroughly outmaneuvered him. At every turn he lowered his weapon. "We will leave," he said. Samuel nodded. "Smart choice." He turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing between the trees like a ghost. And Varrock and his single remaining warrior stood alone in the clearing with the body of their fallen comrade. They began the long walk back to the ship, and Varrock knew, with absolute certainty, that the humans were watching them every step of the way. Back in the Broken Tusk Cantina, Varrock finished his drink and set the empty vessel down on the scarred table surface. The toast de mise, the Futuristic. Young mercenaries around him had not moved during his entire story, their various eyes and sensory organs fixed on him with the intensity of beings who had just learned something that changed their understanding of the universe. The Thixian bounty hunter, named Kreth, was the palest Varrock had ever seen a member of his species. His normally dark chitin faded to a sickly gray, his compound eyes reflecting the dim light with a wet gleam that might have been tears. 11 dead, Kreth whispered, his mandibles barely moving. "And you never even saw most of them die," Varrock nodded slowly. "I've replayed those 12 days in my mind every night for 40 years, he said. "And I still do not know how they moved through our defenses, how they tracked us so perfectly, how they killed warriors who had survived 100 battles. He rolled his sleeve back, revealing the burn scar once more. "This was a gift from the young woman I captured," he continued. "And she gave it to me on the night they burned our camp. And she wanted me to remember her." His 4 eyes grew distant. "Colony heal from everything, as young Kreth pointed out earlier. But whatever she used to make this wound, whatever chemical compound the humans extracted from the plants of that forest, it was designed specifically to prevent regeneration." He traced the twisted flesh with one claw. "She could have killed me, and instead she marked me. And I have carried this scar across the galaxy as a reminder of what happens when you underestimate humanity." The cantina was completely silent now. Every being in the establishment listening to the old warrior's words. A grizzled Vrexian female at a nearby table raised her glass in a gesture of respect, and others followed, a silent acknowledgement of the lesson being taught. "I called for extraction using my emergency beacon," Varrock continued. "A ship came for us 3 days later, and I and my last surviving warrior left New Meridian without looking back." He paused. "The corporation that hired us was furious, and they demanded compensation, and they threatened legal action." A thin smile crossed his face. "I told them they were welcome to send another team, and I told them exactly what had happened to my crew. And they decided that the mining rights were not worth the trouble." He looked directly at Kreth. "That colony still exists today, 40 years later, and they have grown and prospered. And no one has ever tried to remove them again." His scars pulsed with remembered emotion, because word spread through the mercenary community, and then through the military community, and then through every dark corner of the galaxy where beings speak of dangerous prey. He leaned forward. "Humans are not to be hunted." Kreth looked down at the data tablet still clutched in his appendages. "The contract that promised easy credits and simple work," and his mandibles clicked in distress. "The contract is already accepted," he said weakly. and the guild will penalize me heavily if I back out now. Varak shrugged his massive shoulders. Then pay the penalty, because it will be cheaper than a funeral. Another voice spoke up. A young hunter from a species Varak did not recognize. With bright blue scales and curious eyes, surely one mission does not define an entire species, she said. And perhaps the humans on that colony were exceptional. And perhaps other humans would be easier targets. Varak turned his four-eyed gaze on her. I've spent the last 40 years learning about humanity, he said. And I have studied their history, their wars, their accomplishments. He began to count on his clawed fingers. They walked on their moon with technology they had to invent as they went. And they crossed their deepest oceans in vessels made of wood and cloth. And they climbed their highest mountains because the mountains were there. And they split the fundamental building blocks of matter, he continued. They fought each other with such ferocity that millions died in single battles. And they rebuilt their cities after every destruction. And they turned their greatest enemies into allies. And they never once, in their entire history, accepted that anything was impossible. His voice grew heavier. I have fought Qatari berserkers who feel no pain and won leviathans the size of starships. And I have faced the crystalline consciousness and survived their mental attacks. And I'm not afraid of any species in this galaxy, he paused, except humans. The young hunter with blue scales frowned. But why? Because surely there are species that are stronger, faster, more technologically advanced. Yes, Varak agreed. And those species fight to survive, and they fight to protect their territory. And they fight because their biology demands it. He stood up from the table, his full height casting a long shadow across the gathered hunters. Humans fight to win, he said. And they will sacrifice everything to achieve victory. Their comfort and their safety, and even their lives. His scars flared bright. They do not know when they are beaten because they refuse to learn. And they do not accept defeat because they do not recognize it. And they will chase you across a continent until your heart gives out from exhaustion. He pointed at the data tablet in Kreth's hands. They befriended wolves and crossed oceans and split atoms. And they did all of this on a single planet with nothing but the tools they invented. His voice dropped to a growl. And now they are out here among the stars, and they are learning new ways to survive. And they are adapting to every challenge the galaxy throws at them. He turned and began to walk toward the cantina's exit. Return the contract, he said over his shoulder. And hunt Zelothi or Vrex or any of the elder species if you have a death wish. But leave the humans alone. Kreth stood up, his movements jerky with fear. What if I do not? He called after Varak. What if I take the contract anyway? Varak stopped at the door and turned back. Then I will drink to your memory, he said simply. And I will tell your story to the next young fool who thinks humans are easy prey. He pushed through the door and disappeared into the station's crowded corridors behind him. Kreth stared at the data tablet for a long moment. And then he deleted the contract file with trembling appendages. He had suddenly lost his appetite for easy credits. The story Varak told that night in the Broken Tusk. Cantina did not stay in that cantina. Kreth, the Thixian, told it to his hunting partners, who told it to their contacts, who passed it along to mercenary guilds across 3 sectors. And within a month, the tale of New Meridian had spread like fire through dry grass. Some laughed at it and called it exaggeration. Some dismissed. It is the rambling of an old warrior who had lost his nerve, but those who knew Varak's reputation, those who had seen his scars and heard his name spoken in whispers across 100 worlds, those beings listened carefully and took notes. The guild that had offered the contract to hunt human colonists received 17 cancellations in a single week. A hegemony admiral who had been planning a punitive expedition against a human trade convoy quietly reassigned his fleet to patrol duties in a different sector. A slaver operation that had been targeting isolated human settlements shut down entirely, after 3 of its ships went missing near human-controlled space and in the dark corners of the galaxy, where dangerous beings gathered to drink and boast and plan. A new piece of wisdom began to circulate. Never hunt humans. Vorak heard about all of this from his old contacts, beings who owed him favors or feared his wrath. And each report brought him a complicated mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because his warning was being heeded, because perhaps some young fools would survive to grow old. Because of his word. Sadness because he knew it would not last, because there would always be those who believed they were different, who thought they were stronger or smarter or more prepared than the warriors who had died on New Meridian. He was drinking alone in a quiet establishment on a station far from the broken tusk when the Vrexian female from that night found him. She was old, perhaps older than Vorak himself, with scales that had faded to a mottled gray and eyes that held the weight of centuries. And she sat down across from him without asking permission. "I remember you," Vorak said, "and you raised your glass to me after I finished my story." The Vrexian nodded. "My name is Kessa," she said, "and I was on a human world once. Many years ago." Vorak's interest sharpened. "What happened?" Kessa ordered a drink from the automated server and waited until it arrived before speaking. "I was young and stupid," she began, and there was a familiar bitterness in her voice. "And I took a contract to extract a human scientist from a research station." She took a long drink. The scientist had information that a corporate rival wanted, and the job was supposed to be simple: infiltrate the station and bring the target out alive. Her scales rippled in what Vorak recognized as a Vrexian expression of remembered fear. "I got in easily enough, and I found the scientist alone in his laboratory, and I thought the hard part was over." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. He was an old man, fragile and slow, and he could not possibly fight back against a Vrexian warrior in her prime. Her eyes grew distant, but when I told him to come with me, he looked at me like I was a child, and he said something I have never forgotten. Vorak leaned forward. "What did he say?" Kessa met his eyes. "He said that humans had survived ice ages and plagues and world wars and extinction-level events. And he said that his species had clawed their way up from nothing to reach the stars. And he said that if I thought he was going to surrender to a single alien with a gun, then I did not understand what I was dealing with." Shook her head. "And then he triggered a containment protocol that sealed the entire wing of the station, trapping both of us inside." "He trapped himself with you?" Vorak asked, surprised despite himself. "He was willing to die to keep his research out of enemy hands," Kessa confirmed. "And he spent the next 6 hours talking to me through the sealed door, telling me about his work, about his family, about his dreams for his species." Her voice softened. "He could have let me suffocate when the oxygen ran low, but instead he manually overrode the containment system and let me escape." She finished her drink in one long swallow. "I asked him why, and he said that mercy was what separated humans from animals." She looked at Vorak with something like wonder in her ancient eyes. "They are the strangest species I have ever encountered, and I have lived for 400 years." Vorak nodded slowly. "They fight like demons when they have to, and then they show kindness to their enemies when the fighting is done. That is what makes them dangerous." Kessa agreed. "Because you cannot predict them, and you cannot understand them. And just when you think you have them figured out, they do something completely unexpected." They sat in silence for a while, 2 old warriors sharing the weight of their experiences. Finally, Kessa spoke again. "I have been telling my own story to anyone who will listen, and I have been supporting the message you are spreading." She reached across the table and gripped Vorak's arm. "But you know as well as I do that there will always be those who do not listen. Those who think they are special. Those who believe they can succeed where others have failed." Vorak sighed. "I know." Kessa released his arm and stood up. "Then keep telling your story," she said. And I will keep telling mine, and perhaps together we can save a few lives." She turned to leave, then paused. "The scientist I tried to kidnap. He gave me something before I left." She held up a small object, a piece of metal stamped with a human symbol that Varric did not recognize. He said it was a reminder that enemies can become friends, and that the hardest battles are the ones we fight inside ourselves. She tucked the object away. "Humans are strange," she said again, "and I am glad they are in the galaxy with us." She left, and Varric sat alone with his thoughts and his drink and the weight of 40 years of memories outside the station's windows. The stars burned cold and distant, and somewhere out there among those stars, humanity was spreading and growing and becoming something new. Varric raised his glass in a silent toast to the species that had taught him fear, to the species that had shown him mercy, to humanity. 5 years after that conversation with Kessa, Varric received a message that made his blood run cold. It came through encrypted channels, routed through a dozen dead drops and false addresses, and when he finally decoded it, he found himself reading a report that brought back every nightmare from New Meridiana. Young Mercenary Consortium had taken a contract to wipe out a human mining colony on the edge of explored space, and they had sent a force of 50 warriors, the largest hunting party ever assembled against a human settlement. The consortium's leader was a Kalani named Vortek, a distant cousin of Varric himself, and he had publicly dismissed the warnings about human capabilities as the paranoid ramblings of old veterans who had lost their courage. The message was from one of the consortium's junior members, a young warrior who had heard Vorac's stories and wanted him to know what was happening. Varric read the message 3 times, and then he began making arrangements to travel to the sector where the attack was planned. He was not going to help the humans, he was going to watch, and to record, and to make sure that whatever happened would become another warning for the galaxy. The journey took 2 weeks, and when he arrived in the system, he found a scene of absolute chaos. The consortium ships were scattered across the void, some of them drifting dead with their lights extinguished, others limping away on damaged engines, a few simply missing with no explanation. Varric hailed one of the retreating vessels and managed to get a connection to a survivor, a young Vrexian who was clearly in shock, her scales pale and her eyes unfocused. "What happened?" Varric demanded. The Vrexian stared at the screen as if she did not quite believe he was real. "They were ready for us," she whispered, "and they had ships hidden in the asteroid field, and they had weapons we had never seen before." She began to shake, but that was not the worst part. Varric waited when our landing parties touched down. The humans were waiting for them, and they had turned the entire colony into a trap. Her voice broke. 50 warriors went down to the surface, and 3 came back up. She looked directly at the screen, and there was horror in her eyes. They did not just kill our people, and they did not just defeat them, and they broke them. She leaned closer to the screen. "The survivors we recovered. They will not speak about what happened down there, and one of them has not stopped screaming since we pulled him out." Varric felt the old familiar cold settle into his stomach. "Where is Vortek?" The Vrexian laughed, and the sound was tinged with hysteria. "He is still down there, and the humans captured him alive. And they sent us a message saying they would return him when they decided he had learned enough." She closed her eyes. "I thought the stories were exaggerated, and I thought 50 of us would be enough, and I was so stupid." The connection cut out as her ship jumped to hyperspace, fleeing the system as fast as its damaged drives could manage. Varric sat in the cockpit of his own vessel, looking at the debris field that had once been a mercenary fleet, and he felt no satisfaction at being proven right. He felt only sadness, and a deep weariness that seemed to sink into his bones. Was about to leave the system when his communication system activated with an incoming message, and the signal was coming from the planet below. He accepted the connection, and a human face appeared on his screen. It was an older woman, perhaps 50 years old, with gray-streaked hair and hard eyes. And she wore the practical clothing of a frontier colonist. "You are Vorak Malthresh," she said. And it was not a question. "I am." The woman nodded. "My name is Maria Santos, and I am the leader of this colony. And I know who you are." Vorak's 4 eyes narrowed. "How?" "Because we studied you," Maria replied. "And we studied your story. And we prepared for this day because we knew that sooner or later someone would test the warnings you have been spreading." She smiled, and there was something fierce and proud in that expression. "We wanted to make sure the test was convincing." Vorak understood then what the humans had done. They had not just defended themselves against an attack, they had staged a demonstration. A lesson so brutal and complete that it would echo across the galaxy for generations. "You used this attack as a message," he said. Maria nodded. "We knew they were coming, and we had months to prepare, and we decided that this would be our opportunity to reinforce everything you have been saying for 40 years. Her smile faded. "We do not enjoy killing, and we did not want this fight, but if a fight was inevitable, we decided to win it so thoroughly that no one would ever doubt the warnings again." Vorak was silent for a long moment. "What will you do with Vortek?" Maria's expression grew complicated, a mixture of anger and something that might have been pity. "We will keep him for a while, and we will show him what we are. And we will teach him the same lesson you learned on New Meridian." She paused. "And then we will send him home to tell his story." Vorak felt a chill run down his spine. "You are creating another messenger." "Yes," Maria confirmed. "Because one voice is easy to dismiss, but 2 voices are harder. And 3 voices are harder still." She leaned toward the screen. "Every generation, there will be those who doubt, and every generation, we will create new messengers to spread the word." Her eyes were cold and ancient, the eyes of a species that had clawed its way up from nothing and refused to ever go back. "We do not want to fight the galaxy," she said, "and we would prefer to live in peace and trade and cooperation." Her voice hardened. "But we will not be hunted, and we will not be conquered, and we will not be underestimated." She straightened. "Tell your story, Vorak Malthresh, and tell this story too. And make sure the galaxy understands." The connection ended. Vorak sat alone in his ship, surrounded by the wreckage of 50 warriors who had thought humans were easy prey. And he began to compose a message. He had a new chapter to add to his warnings, and he would make sure everyone heard it. 50 years had passed. This new Meridian Vorak Malthresh sat in a different cantina on a different station. But the scene was familiar. Young mercenaries gathered around him, hungry for stories, eager to learn the secrets of survival. His scars had multiplied over the decades, each one a story, each one a memory. But the burn on his arm remained the most prominent, never healing, never fading, a permanent reminder of the lesson he had learned. The faces around him were different species than before, new races that had joined the galactic community since his youth, but their eyes held the same eagerness, the same dangerous confidence that had once shone in his own, a young hunter. Her scales of vivid purple that marked her as a member of a species Vorak had never encountered, leaned forward with a question. "Is it true that you once fought humans and survived?" Vorak smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had told this story 1,000 times and would tell it 1,000 more. "It is true," he said. "And let me tell you what I learned." He began his story, the same story he had told in the Broken Tusk all those years ago. And as he spoke, he watched the faces of his audience change. Skepticism gave way to interest. Interest gave way to concern. Concern gave way to fear. When he finished, the purple-scaled hunter was pale. Her scales faded to a washed-out lavender. Her confidence shattered. "But surely," she began. Vorak held up his hand. "I know what you are going to say, and I have heard every version of this objection." He counted on his fingers. Surely technology has advanced and humans can be beaten now. Or surely you just encountered an exceptional group and most humans are weaker. Or surely the stories have been exaggerated over the years. He shook his head. I have watched human space for 50 years. And in that time, their technology has advanced faster than any species in recorded history. And they have settled more worlds than any newcomer race before them. And they have grown from a curiosity to a major power. His scars pulsed. And in all that time, not a single successful attack has been recorded against a human settlement. The young hunters exchanged glances. Vorak leaned forward. There was a consortium attack 5 years after my mission. And 50 warriors went in, and 3 came out. And their leader was returned to his people after spending 6 months as a human prisoner. His voice dropped. He never spoke of what happened to him. But he retired from mercenary work and spent the rest of his life warning others to stay away from human space. He looked around the table. There was a hegemony fleet that attempted to blockade a human trade route. And the humans did not fight them directly. And instead, they simply waited. He smiled grimly. Within 3 months, the fleet had been destroyed by equipment failures and supply disruptions and accidents that could never quite be traced back to human agents. His 4 eyes swept across his audience. There was a pirate king who captured a human passenger vessel and demanded ransom. And the humans paid the ransom and recovered their people. And 6 months later, the pirate king was dead. He paused, along with his entire fleet, his base, his family, and everyone who had ever worked for him. The cantina had grown very quiet. Humans do not forget, Vorak said. And humans do not forgive, and if you attack them, they will respond with a patience and a determination that outlasts generations. He stood up from the table. I am old now, even by Kalani standards, and I have lived longer than most of my kind, because I learned one simple lesson early in my career. He pointed at each of the young hunters in turn. Never hunt humans. His scars flared bright, or suffer the consequences. He turned to leave, but a voice stopped him. The purple-scaled hunter again, her voice small and uncertain. You have told this story for 50 years, she said, and you have warned everyone who would listen. And I have to ask why. Vorak turned back. Why what? Why do you care so much? She asked. And why have you dedicated your life to spreading this warning? Vorak was silent for a long moment, his 4 eyes growing distant, memories of New Meridian playing behind them. Because they could have killed me, he finally said. And they had every right to kill me. And I came to their world with death in my heart, and they defeated me utterly. His voice softened. But instead of taking my life, they gave me a purpose. And they turned me from an enemy into a messenger. He touched the burned scar on his arm. The woman who gave me this could have killed me. And the man who let me leave could have had me executed. And every human I have encountered since could have treated me as an enemy. He shook his head. Instead, they showed me mercy. And they gave me a reason to spend my remaining years doing something meaningful. He looked directly at the young hunter. I was a killer for hire. A monster who took credits to destroy lives. And the humans I tried to hurt transformed me into something better. His scars pulsed one final time. That is the most terrifying thing about them. And that is what I want you to understand. He turned and walked toward the door. They do not just defeat their enemies. He called over his shoulder. And they do not just survive and adapt and win. He paused at the threshold. They make their enemies question everything they believe, and they turn monsters into messengers. And they change the galaxy around them simply by being what they are. He stepped through the door. Never hunt humans, he said one final time, his voice carrying back to the silent cantina. Because even if you survive, you will never be the same. And Vorak Malthresh walked out into the station's crowded corridors. Another day's work done, another generation warned, behind him. The young hunters sat in stunned silence, their dreams of easy prey and simple victories crumbling to dust. And somewhere across the galaxy, on 100 worlds and 1,000 stations, other voices were spreading the same message. Old warriors and reformed, enemies and beings who had learned the hard way what it meant to underestimate humanity. The message would never stop spreading, because humans never stopped being exactly what they were: dangerous, merciful, unstoppable, and the galaxy would just have to learn to live with that.